Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
I feel like reflection is one of the most underutilized parenting tool there is. There's so many times where we have a big moment and we're just really trying to move through it as quickly as possible. And we don't want to go back and revisit it because it's uncomfortable for us, it's uncomfortable for them. And we think, oh, no good's going to come of it. Somewhere along the line, I think we were taught that if you don't address the behavior in the second it's happening, that moment is lost and you can never come back to it. And the reality is what we know about how kids, when I know Dan Siegel calls it flipping your lid, when their lid is flipped and their emotions are just in control and the logic has shut off and they cannot really logically think through things, in that moment, they're not even remembering what's happening. They don't know what you're talking about. All your wisdom that you're sharing is not working at all. And so if you can tell your child in the morning, hey, I'm going to get you ice cream in the afternoon, and they can remember it, then you don't have to address a behavior in that moment. As a matter of fact, the best time is to not address it in that moment, but to come back later when everyone is calm and to talk about it.
Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. Okay, I'm so excited to get started and talk about our topic today. This is such an important topic and definitely recommend getting a paper and pen out, take some notes. We have an amazing guest, Amy Sage, and she is going to be talking about her new curriculum, parenting life skills curriculum. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Amy first, and we're going to just dive into the importance of emotional intelligence, how you work on it, why you work on it, and all that good stuff. So Amy Sage is the co-founder of Parenting EQ. She is a school counselor, parent educator, and mother of 2 middle school aged children with over 20 years of experience in holding master's degrees in both school counseling and clinical counseling. And as a national certified counselor, Amy has dedicated her career to improving children's mental health. She has created a social emotional learning curriculum that is widely used in homes and by counselors to develop children's emotional intelligence. Motivated by her passion for improving children's overall emotional wellness, Amy launched Parenting EQ during the COVID pandemic to provide parents and educators with vital resources for supporting the mental health of young learners. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
This is going to be fantastic. I love this topic. I think it's so important, and I'm just thrilled to dive into it. So I know you and I have talked about kind of your story, and I just think it's so relevant and important. And I'd love to have you share more about what inspired the creation of the Parenting EQ life skills curriculum, especially for homeschool settings.
Yes, well, like most things, it's been quite a journey. So I've been a school counselor for many years and really kept seeing the same behaviors over and over with our kids, just really big feelings that came with then huge reactions. There was big worries and anxiety. We saw a lot of school avoidance. Then we have friendship conflicts that instead of improving over time, they're just getting work. They're turning into like crazies all the time. Then as the kids get older, you start to see a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of lack of self-worth and self-harm, leading to much bigger concerns. And so at the time, the other co-founder and I were at schools and we were just teaching some really basic skills to kids, just about noticing their feelings and being able to calm themselves down. And it was making a difference. And so Parents were looking for more things like that they could do at home. Teachers were saying we need some more concrete tools. We're not sure what to do with all these big behaviors and feelings in our classrooms. And everyone was trying to get into an outside therapist, but there, was so many wait lists. And so we kept saying for about 2 years, how can we share this information to parents? How can we get this out there on a larger scale? And not every kid requires therapy. A lot of times they just need to learn some basic skills. And truthfully, we need to give parents the confidence that you can have this conversation with your kid. You can teach them this quick breathing exercise, and it will make a big difference. And so we had been going back and forth about this, and then COVID hit. And so, everyone kind of took a step back. Now we're at home with our own families. We're seeing even more behaviors, families, fellow counselors, everyone's reaching out looking for resources. And we thought, what's a better time to launch a business than during COVID? So we actually started as a subscription box. But we were gaining a lot of popularity in homeschools and charter schools because there's like a ton of math and English curriculums and programs, but there weren't a lot of ones that were addressing not just behaviors, but also just the idea of how are we ready to learn and how can we get ourselves into a mind frame to be ready to learn. And so that's really how parenting EQ kind of was born and was morphing. And because, a lot of people were already homeschooling their kids, I think even before COVID, we had seen a lot of people because oftentimes those kids were, neurodiverse and they needed more support than maybe what the local schools could offer. And they wanted to meet kids where they were at, which is really what, homeschool allows us for so much personalization. And so it really aligned well with our resources. And so we kind of changed our original subscription box model to really focus on a comprehensive curriculum that could be used by homeschool and charter school families. We added more topics, better and more ways to teach it, and just easier for them to overall implement.
No, there's so many things that you shared that I think are so important. And, so many of our clients in the autism community are homeschooled. That's really common and very successful for families that would like to take on the homeschooling route. They find that it can be very effective. And so I love what you're doing. And I think it's so relevant for those families. And we're going to talk more specifics on the areas that you target that I think are so critical for all kids, but especially our neurodiverse community. So, and I just love that it just authentically was formed from your life experience, and you realized that there's a need that wasn't being met out there. And so you created this curriculum. And I think that's so fantastic. It's such a great resource. And so I'd love to start off with just talking about, how you define emotional intelligence. I know that's a term a lot of people probably have heard. Maybe some understand it quite well, others may not. And so I think it's important that we talk about what is emotional intelligence and how do we address things like you mentioned self-awareness, bringing that awareness to the emotions and emotional regulation as well, especially for the neurodiverse learners. So how do you define emotional intelligence?
Absolutely. So Daniel Goleman really began to raise awareness about emotional intelligence, and he kind of coined the phrase when he wrote a book in the mid-90s. And so since then, there's been just so many things that people have delved into further about what exactly it is. But he had defined it in emotional intelligence, or EQ. He defined it as a person's ability to identify, to evaluate, control, and express emotions. So basically, it's recognizing what feelings are you having, being able to name those feelings, having the ability to calm yourself down so then you can express them appropriately. You can work together with other people. And so there's 5 competencies that basically EQ covers. It's self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, social skills, and motivation. Now, I want to bring up real quick IQ because I think a lot of people have heard about IQ. And IQ, those are measuring those cognitive skills like logic and memory and reasoning. And so that has kind of always thought to be relatively set, where EQ, especially when I was growing up, was called those soft skills or those life skills. And it really can be learned at any time and at any age. And I always like to kind of have people think about people that maybe they have worked with in the past and how can we distinguish between a high IQ and a high EQ. So one person always comes to mind for me, a very, very, very intelligent person. No doubt they had lots of knowledge. They had a very high IQ. They were also very difficult to communicate with. They were very quick to anger, very condescending. So just an overall like person that's just, you struggle to clearly talk to them or set expectations or whatever it was. And so in my mind, that person, high IQ, but they're just difficult. They're yelling at people. They're demanding things. They're doing all this stuff. And so it's like, well, you're not really controlling your emotions. You're not really able to express yourself in a way that helps you work with others. And so that kind of really separates from me what does EQ look like versus just the IQ that I think most people have already heard of.
Yeah, well, and that is such an important skill in life to be able to handle your emotions and those 5 competencies. And I know we're going to dive deeper into those in a bit, but I'm glad that you mentioned those because that, I think everybody talks about having how great it is to have a high IQ, but if you don't have emotional intelligence, you can really struggle in life. And it doesn't matter if you have a high IQ because these challenges related to EQ can really put a damper on things within relationships and all kinds of things.
And we don't work in isolation either. And so, we are constantly collaborating and coming together to solve problems and working as teams. And we really are very successful when we do those things, but you have to be able to manage these feelings you're having and recognize everything that's going on. And you mentioned about how does it translate to neurodiverse learners? I mean, everyone has strengths and challenges and their own learning preferences. So that's why we really focus on teaching these skills in such a variety of ways, because some people just really need to see something visual and concrete or laid out in steps, or some people, everybody has their own thing. And so it's really about how do you learn best? How can you really make this meaningful and relevant in your life? And so whatever that looks like, whether it is a visual checklist or whether it is drawing something or listening to music or whatever it is, for emotion regulation, some kids really like sensory tools. They like fidgets. Some other ones just really want to go in a quiet space. Other people need to have that connection with people. They need to co-regulate. Some like to just listen to social stories, like whatever it might be. And so being aware that just everybody has their different learning preferences. And so how can we make sure that everyone can get what they need from it?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it sounds like within the curriculum, there's that flexibility to make adjustments for the parents to be able to provide those opportunities for their kids based on their learning style. And so we'll talk about that too. Yeah, I want to make sure you share some examples of what that might look like and to kind of bring it to life so that our listeners can really understand what this is, because it's beautiful. Your curriculum is beautiful. It's very clear. It's very well laid out. And so we'll do our best to describe it for our listeners. And I want to make sure that we talk about the research. And I know when I was doing some research on your curriculum, I found that you were aligned with the CASEL's competencies and the Board of Health Standards. Can you share a little bit more about the CASEL and why that was important to align your curriculum with it?
So as I mentioned, since Dan Goleman wrote his book, there's just been so much research, I feel like in general, whether you call it EQ, whether CASEL's competencies, we're basically saying the same type of things, which is how are we recognizing feelings? How are we calming down? How are we making good decisions? What conflict skills do we have? Friendship skills, just basic social skills. And so CASEL is really the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. So their goal is to really make sure that social emotional learning are part of education. And so throughout the years as a counselor, we talked a lot about, is it CASEL aligned? Is it CASEL aligned? And their competencies are basically similar to EQ: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So we're all looking for the same outcome of what we want these kids to look like, what they're able to handle as far as conflicts and bouncing back from challenges. And so CASEL really does a great job of highlighting all the research that's been done. If you go on their website, they have just a plethora of information that's showing about how these social emotional skills really, not only improves behavior, but also helps with academic achievement. There's, just back to EQ. So Dan Goleman has done so much research, and the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, they have their whole line of research that they've done. And so really we see overall that there's so much long lasting impact because emotions are our biggest distractors. And so when we equip kids with the ability to handle those negative emotions, such as anxiety and frustration, even boredom. It helps them focus better. It helps them be more resilient. And then when we're teaching these skills that help with their positive relationships with their peers, so they have more empathy, they have more cooperation, they know how to solve problems, they know how to, just in general kind of talk through things with other people, that's going to just increase their overall relationship skills. And so we know that if they can focus better, if they can bounce back from challenges, if they're getting along better with their peers, they're going to do better overall. Their behaviors are going to reflect that. And it just showing that even healthier lifestyles as adults, because they have lower rates of substance abuse, they have healthier eating habits, better stress management, because they've really learned these healthy coping strategies that are so crucial that sometimes even as adults, we're still struggling to find those healthy coping strategies and to manage all of our own feelings.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It's such a gift to have a strong foundation in emotional intelligence. And, we know that what makes us most happy based on research is meaningful relationships and to give individuals the opportunity to be successful in life within relationships, whether it's friendships, community-based relationships, job relationships, that is going to lead to a higher quality of life. And I think it's just so essential to have a strong foundation in that area and just love what you're doing. It's such a high impact.
Yeah, I agree. Connection is everything. And I think that really came to light during COVID when so many people were isolated and struggling even more, recognizing that, we were kind of built to live in communities and to support each other and develop those relationships. And we really do need that to thrive.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, I want to make sure that we talk about these components of your curriculum. So, if you could share more about the creation of the 5 physical games and the 6 storybooks, what do they entail and why did you choose these formats?
So, because kids learn in all sorts of unique ways, we really wanted to include as many different ways that can really resonate with kids as possible. And so we kind of landed on, because we've done tons of class lessons and I've worked with thousands of students. And we know that, behavior is a form of communication. And so a lot of times we focus so quickly on, like if you think of the iceberg picture, we focus so quickly on the tip of the iceberg and what actually we see as the behavior, but there's so much going on underneath. What's their feelings? What are they hungry? Did they not get enough sleep? I mean, just some basic needs. And so looking at, okay, if we step back and start to take our children's behavior a little bit less personal, when we recognize, hey, maybe that's a skill that's lacking. And so how are we going to teach this skill? Well, what do they enjoy the most? Do they love being read to? Do they love playing games? Do they love interaction and having that experiential learning? And so we wanted to just incorporate so many of those. And so we kind of started with the format of read, play, practice, and tools. And so we know that reading is so good to build language, listening skills. It's obviously a great way to directly teach skills so they can read a story and it doesn't feel like it's happening to them. So if they don't want to have that personal experience, that personal connection, they can watch what is that person doing and how is that outcome for them? Or maybe they do want to relate to that person in the story. So it can work both ways. We know play is the secret way to learn, that when kids are not in those big moments of feelings, they can think logically about things. They can, come up with great ideas and actually think through, I wonder why that would hurt someone's feelings, or I wonder why that would be a better choice. And so plus it builds, like you're saying, those connections, those crucial connections with our kids, and they're not going to learn unless they feel connected. And so play is just a really easy way to kind of build that connection with them. And then practice and reflection. I feel like reflection is one of the most underutilized parenting tool there is. There's so many times where we have a big moment and we're just really trying to move through it as quickly as possible. And we don't want to go back and revisit it because it's uncomfortable for us. It's uncomfortable for them. And we think, oh, no good's going to come of it. Somewhere along the line, I think we were taught that if you don't address the behavior in the second it's happening, that moment is lost and you can never come back to it. And the reality is what we know about how kids kids when, I know Dan Siegel calls it flipping your lid, when their lid is flipped and their emotions are just in control and the logic has shut off and they cannot really logically think through things, in that moment, they're not even remembering what's happening. They don't know what you're talking about. All your wisdom that you're sharing is not working at all. And so if you can tell your child in the morning, hey, I'm going to get you ice cream in the afternoon, and they can remember it, then you don't have to address a behavior in that moment. As a matter of fact, the best time is to not address it in that moment, but to come back later when everyone is calm and to talk about it. So practicing, when they're calm and doing these skills is really important, but then also recognizing that no matter what happens, we can come back to it and reflect later. What do you think you were feeling at that time? What worked really well? What didn't work? And maybe we want to do differently. And we're not shaming and blaming, and we're just saying, hey, for next time, because something's going to come up again. And so what can we do? And so having those active periods of reflection. Some of our activities, it's like, do this for a couple of days and then come back and talk about what that felt like, really encouraging that ongoing reflection, because we also want to send the message to our kids all the time is, of course, it's not going to work exactly the first time, or it's not going to be exactly what you want it to be. That's not the point. The point is, how are we growing? How are we being better? How are we making improvements? It's not at all about perfection. And so having that as a built-in time to go back and say, what did we learn from this and what can we do better? Whenever we leave anywhere, my mantra with my kids is, what's your takeaway? What's your takeaway from this? What did you get out of this? Positive and negative. And let's think about what we would do differently going forward. Oh, it was wonderful, and we're just going to do exactly the same thing. Then let's celebrate that really worked well for us. And then the last section has to do with tools. So we talk about internal tools like breathing and positive self-talk, and we talk about external tools like sensory tools, creating a calm corner, things like that. Now, external tools are great to kind of get that conversation going, to teach kids to practice, but we always want to move towards those internal tools because, to be honest, when you're out on the soccer field or when you're doing, a speech in front of a class or whatever it is, that breathing and that positive self-talk are always going to be with you. You might not be able to have that fidget with you. And so practicing how to calm our body down so that we can be in our thinking, rational brain, and using positive self-talk, like the little coach inside of us building us up. You can do it. It's okay. Just take a deep breath, are really crucial. And so we always try to incorporate like a concrete tool so they have something to take away. And so the games, we created all these games because as much as there's great resources out there, we felt like some of the things we wanted to teach, they didn't go deep enough in some of the games. So we decided, let's just create our own. So we have friendship board games and games about self-care and empathy and problem solving. And then the books, we've sourced to try to cover all the topics: growth mindset, feelings, listening skills, communication skills, because like I said, reading social stories is such a great way to share so much good information with kids.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I love the process that you're having these families go through and the emphasis on reflection. I think that is so powerful. And as you mentioned, when you reflect at a later time, when you're available to process the information, you're going to gain so much more from that reflection opportunity. And that is a huge part of our programs in RDI as well with parents, where we teach the parents to reflect. And so I think it's such a great tool to enhance what the families are doing and also helping the families. It can be hard in the moment sometimes to even be regulated yourself as a guide. And so when you're dealing with these hard behaviors and these challenges and these big emotions, and so, just to even have that mindset of to step away and to come back at a later time when everybody's calm and can be really clear-headed and really focus on, the learning opportunity. And I think the other thing that's so key is that practice. So a lot of times with autistic individuals, it can feel overwhelming in the moment to, make those decisions and to adjust, but to have that opportunity to practice and kind of, I'm envisioning more of like a role play type of scenario. Is that how you lay out the activities?
Oh, yes. We do tons of different role plays. Some can be
Okay.
silly, so you can make it, we want it to be fun, but that repetitive, either this is the response I'm going to say, or this is, I'm going to ask that question, or how to ask to join, that just makes kids feel so much more comfortable doing it. Because, like you said, in the heat of the moment, and if we're looking at it again as skills, you wouldn't send your kid like to a piano recital and never have taught them to play the piano. We would never think about that. We would never say, go play a
Yeah.
basketball game and we're not even going to teach you how to dribble. So if we look at it
Yeah.
again from that lens, like, how do we expect kids to just go out in the world and start socializing and meeting kids and doing all these things? And they haven't been shown and been able to practice it themselves. And I know at first people are role playing, it feels kind of odd, but once kids, kids love it. And once they get
Yeah.
into it, they can test out all sorts of different things. Like, I'm going to try this. No, that didn't sound good. Or I didn't like that. Or that felt weird. Or this is what I really liked. And it just makes them feel so much more confident. And that's half of
Yeah.
what they need, is the confidence. And the other half is the specific tool to go and do it. And so that practice piece,
Mhm.
that constantly coming back and saying, I didn't like that, I want to make this better. Yes, it
Yeah.
helps kids get way more comfortable in that moment.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It makes me think of a time we did that with our kids, and my husband and I, and my younger daughter was having a hard time with something, and she was having a big moment, big emotional reaction. And so we did the practice and the role play. And I even enhanced it just to be really silly and make it look kind of out there and bigger than it was supposed to be, kind of like, nah, that doesn't look like maybe the best way to react. And just to make it fun and playful. It can be fun to learn these things. It can be playful, and it can take the pressure off so that kids can be like, oh, yes, okay, I'm going to try that a different way next time. And, be able to get through that muscle memory of learning, okay, when you recognize these kinds of dynamics in a social situation, then you can remember those tools that you practiced. And I think
Mm-hmm. And I
that's
think
valuable.
So I think like 99% of what we say is have fun with this. Like, yes, you do
Yeah.
want to, because they always want to do it the wrong way. That's always the silliest. And that's great.
Yeah.
And that's fun. And then you can say, and here's all the reasons like why that might not work out so well. So you do want to
Yeah.
practice doing it the way that you want them to do it. But the point
Yeah.
is that this is about connection. And, we know that
Mhm.
just in general, for kids to learn, they have to feel emotionally safe and connected. They want a
Mhm.
why to what, why are they doing this? They want to be able to see mistakes as, oh, it's a part of learning. It's not something I should feel bad about. What can I do differently? They
Yeah.
want tools to be able to succeed. And so if we make sure that we're giving them that, and they're having fun while doing it, then it doesn't feel like a chore and to learn this. And it's going to overall improve so many other things in their lives.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, a thread that you're sharing is having that growth mindset. And I think it's so important that we are giving these kids opportunity to have that growth mindset, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's actually, mistakes was how we learn, and that there's no judgment. When we're practicing, or there's feedback given, or there's reflection, that we are in a safe space and we're learning and we're growing and we're going to try again. And we're not going to get it right even another time. It's just about learning and growing and having a growth mindset. And I think that's such a powerful message as well, to help the parents really embrace that and learn that concept.
Well, and it takes the pressure off. I don't have to know all the answers. As a parent, we don't know all the answers. And when we can be honest about that, not in a scary way where the kid's like, oh no, what's going to happen? Like, no, we're still being responsible, in charge, and there's boundaries, and you're safe. But I don't have to know. Let's figure it out together. Let's be kind of
Mhm.
partners in this exploration. And, you're going to come up with some better ideas. My kids have come up with such great ideas about things that I would have never thought about. And if I came at the attitude of, this is the way we're doing it, and this is all, I feel like there's so many times, especially as they get older and these concepts get much bigger, of course, they're not going to know exactly what the answer is. It's all about, how do you use your resources? Where do you go to get that answer? Who can you go to get help from? How can you get more information? That's really what's going to be so much valuable than just always having the right answer, is how do we go
Mhm.
and figure it out together? And I think that
Yeah.
that's just a huge valuable tool.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. therapeutic approach to growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's tagforgrowth.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com. It is, yeah, that dynamic intelligence too, being able to think in the moment and decide how to solve that problem. And that is another important life skill that will lead to happiness in life if you have a high ability to dynamically decide in that moment what to do. And I think that's so important. So I know you mentioned earlier that this can be for all ages, and I want to talk about the different age ranges that you're targeting here with your curriculum and how you adjust, your topics in your books for the different developmental stages.
So we have two age ranges right now. We have a mini ages 4 to 7 and a junior ages 8 to 12. And so developmentally, there's a lot happening between these ages, even within 4 to 7 and 8 to 12. And so that's why it's kind of a range. And our activities, we start as like simple activities, and then some go deeper or more like deeper concepts. And so it really kind of depends where your kid is at too, because, some of them, they need to just be introduced to the concept because maybe they're just completely unfamiliar, where others you say, oh, I already know what this is. So how do we just kind of make it a little bit deeper? And so basically, like, for example, in the mini and the junior, the major difference, one is the books. The books definitely have quite a jump between, the mini, that it's more simplistic, and the kind of ideas that the mini is going to be done more together, parent-led for the most part. It's all very interactive, and so it is games and role play and so forth, but you're really doing a lot of it together. And then with the junior is you can have the option of doing it together if you want to both read the book or read the book separately and talk about it. But there's also a workbook. So you can start out doing the game or the activity together, but then there's also a part where the kid can be independent and complete like the activities in there. And then there's a reflection, and then you come back and you talk about it together. So it really kind of depends where your kid is at, what skill they have a strength in. And so that's kind of the main difference. And then basically like within, the games, the books, the topics, they're all similar, but we just teach it differently depending on the level. So for instance, like the mini, when we talk about friendships, we start with basic, what is a good friend? And how do you ask to play or join a group? And how do we learn to wait? Because in social situations, we either have to wait our turn to talk or to play. How do we make people feel with our behaviors and, expected and unexpected behaviors and so forth? But then in the junior, we do start with, okay, what are the friendship basics? But now we're going to go deeper. We're going to talk about handling conflicts. And so we're looking at, is that behavior rude, mean, or bullying? Is this friendship a healthy friendship? Like, can I let some of this go because it's not a big deal? Or do I need to speak up and establish my boundaries? And, what does that look like? What's the intent behind these actions? And then, even like friendship maintenance skills, like we need to show people we care about them. We don't just take friendships for granted. So again, it's just kind of going a little bit deeper as it goes along.
I love the fact that you're working on boundary setting too at that age. That is something so many adults still struggle with. And if we could have learned, as kids, how to set boundaries, things would be a lot easier in life. And what a fantastic thing to target for kids. I think that's so important. And, just understanding levels of friendship and how do you contribute to a friendship? That's a lot of perspective taking. And these are, kind of things that autistic individuals oftentimes have a hard time with, and so important to work on to be able to get these skills and to be able to apply them in social settings. And I love that you're practicing it away from the actual peer interaction so they have opportunities to practice without the demand and can, really gain these skills in a safe place that's supportive. I think it's so great.
Mm-hmm. Just real quick, I'm going to say, most of us as adults didn't grow up learning any of these skills. I really didn't grow up learning these skills either. I just got super interested in it when I had all of these kids with all of these struggles. I said, how am I going to help and support these kids? What do they really need? And again, taking a look at that behavior and saying, what is a skill? And so a lot of the times I have parents tell me, I feel like I'm learning this alongside my child. And I said, you are, because EQ can be learned at any age. It's so valuable for us to know these skills too. And we have to give ourselves grace that we weren't necessarily taught that. And that's not bad. We didn't know, we didn't have programs that taught it. We didn't maybe have parents who were interested in this kind of thing. And so it's naturally evolved into something we recognize is so beneficial and we need, but give ourselves grace. It's okay for you not to know this. That's why it is so interactive, so that you guys are doing it together. And this language becomes a common language about setting boundaries or talking about how you feel. Then the whole family can benefit from it.
It's so true. And, I always like the quote, when you know better, you do better. And if you don't know better, you can't, you couldn't have done better. But once you do, then that's going to not only end with the kids, the parents' lives are going to be enhanced. And no doubt that we're on a journey of life, right? All of us. And even as adults, we're always learning and evolving. And what a great opportunity to go through that with your kids through this process. So I think it's fantastic. So I'd love to talk about how a typical session or activity is structured. And I know you have lessons and I'd love for you to share, do they build sequentially or are they kind of standalone? How does that work? And how does a family really kind of set up a structured lesson or activity?
Right. So the big picture is that it's about 36 weeks of lessons because there's 9 units, 9 different topics. And so roughly 1 unit is taught a month. But again, I'll say that is that it depends though on what skills you're trying to build with your kids. Now, we always talk about starting with the first 2 units, which is feeling, self-awareness, and self-regulation, because those are really the foundation of everything. And so putting some time into looking at those lessons and whether you do all of them. And the kind of the framework is that they can be done. There's 2 core lessons a week and then 1 enrichment lesson. So if they wanted to do it 2 times a week or 3 times a week, or they could do it 2 times a week. And then a lot of times, I know especially homeschool families, they do kind of a different schedule. Sometimes they go year round. So you could extend if you wanted to during breaks, just do some of the enrichment lessons. You could still be extending that material. And if you're also looking at what the topics are and what kind of information that they need, deciding, would do 3 days would be great to do this topic. And then another topic might, they have more strengths in it. So it might only be 2 days. So it's roughly, between 2 or 3. And it can take anywhere from 10, 15 minutes up to 30 minutes or longer. If you love a game, keep playing the game. If you love an activity, revisit the activity. Sometimes there are more than one activities. And so you could decide to just start with one, just read the book, just read parts of the book and don't delve into the other activities if you want to make sure that they understand the concept. So that's kind of the bigger picture. Now, the actual structure of the lesson is there's always a learning objective and a list of materials. And we have a grid schedule at the beginning of every week. So you can really see what's included and what materials are needed. And because we're considered an open and go, really it comes with all the materials. The only things that you might need are like common household items. Like if you're doing some kind of fun obstacle course or something like that, then you can bring in and we give you ideas. But for the most part, everything else is included. And so it starts with that. And then the whole thing, every lesson starts with a whole family discussion. And that idea is to include all the kids in the household, regardless of age or developmental level, so that everyone can get started talking about the same topic. And they're always like some type of engaging question that you're started. So you might give a little information, but it's not just like a sit and get lecture. It's very much like, hey, have you heard the word feelings before? What does that mean to you? And you're really trying to get information from your kids to see kind of where they are. And then everybody can start that same discussion and then go off and do independent things or other things if they want to. Then it goes into the activities. And as I said, could be 1, there could be 2, or 3. And it's based on the things I talked about earlier. Sometimes there's part of a book to read, or there's a game you play, or a different way to kind of practice the skill. And then there's always ends with a what did you learn section. So that's the reflection. How much did they retain? What do we want to hear more of? How much do they understand the concepts? And then along the way, there's like instructor tips, which is kind of like parent tips. There's challenge if there's certain things where you can take it a little bit deeper if your kid is ready. Or try this. And that's encouraging adults to participate too, especially when we talk about, hey, let's talk about I feel messages. We're going to teach kids how to say how they feel using I feel messages. And so now parents are going to be modeling all of this too. So the lessons are kind of standalone in the sense that you can absolutely bounce around from different topics. Like during the friendship part, when we talk about conflicts, they are going to say, hey, revisit the problem solving strategies, because we talk specifically, teach, very specific strategies so kids know they have so many options, not one way to solve a problem. But we do highly recommend starting with the self-awareness and the self-regulation.
Yeah, that's so important. And those are huge areas that our clients need help with. So I love that those are an emphasis of your program. And we work on that a lot in RDI programs. And it is kind of a key foundation. And it allows you to then be available for more advanced topics. And I think that as you're describing that, it's nice that those you can kind of pace it out for individuals with autism that might need like the story time, then maybe a little break or a sensory movement opportunity, and then they can go to the game or, the next activity, that you can really kind of choose your pacing for your child, and that you can really break it up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can stop in the middle of a lesson and just go to the reflection questions that have to do with what you covered. If you wanted to come back, or sometimes they'll say, I played the game for so long because we just had so much fun and it covered so many different things. So this is totally about personalization. That's what I love the most about it, is you don't have to do it a certain way. This isn't to mastery. We are going to be forever trying to learn and master these skills in whatever way that looks like for us. And so we're just doing what do we need in that moment and what kind of thing can benefit us. But absolutely, go slow, go fast. If you're having fun with something, stay with it. If you're like, that activity was terrible, well, don't do it again. It is all about being engaged, having fun, keeping those connections really strong.
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, one of the other things that I think is so great is that you talk about this being a screen-free support tool. And, I'd love to talk about that, why you chose that route, and why do you think that's important to be screen-free? And I know you've mentioned some of the materials that the kids and the parents have access to, and feel free to expand on that further. But let's talk about the screen-free part.
Well, technology and the impact it has on our kids is its own podcast. So
Yes.
we don't have time to delve into it. But, again, back to that, connection is everything. And so we know, and especially for, younger kids too, that really happens face to face without technology, seeing people's facial expressions, hearing their tone, being with them, even that physical touch and hug and whatever, that kid, it really resonates with them. And so we didn't want to have it on a screen. We didn't want it to be something that they could just go kind of do alone. As much as, we want to give them independence in the junior section and allow them to be using that on their own, we still wanted the parent to be involved, because it's so crucial that they all share this language. And they can, think about these skills later, like, remember in the game when this came up and now we're in the same situation. It just applies to everyday life. And so we really wanted to not force that moment, but we really wanted to provide those opportunities. And so this was something that needed to be really interactive. And so parents get a physical manual. And so it gives them the instructions. It's all scripted, which means that you can follow the script if you want to. We even say when we ask questions and, what should the kids be saying, we give possible answers. Because I know sometimes I get feedback that say, well, I'm not sure what I'm looking for them to say. So we've tried to make it just really simple in that here's what you're asking and here's what you're saying, but make it your own. If you would never ask a question like this, then make it your own question. This has to
Yeah.
literally just roll into what you're already doing with your family. We're not trying to add more things or make it seem clinical or weird. We want it to be so helpful and just kind of flow with your own language in your family. And so it has the answers, and then there is a digital manual for the sake of, so they can make copies, so they can print out copies of the activities or information for the game and things like that. And it always kind of starts with like the only other video they have is there's a video of me talking in the beginning, just kind of giving like an introduction to parents. There's a couple times where my kids have actually done some breathing techniques, and I put those in a video because I thought that would be fun for kids to see. But everything else is really just laid out in this physical manual, basically.
No, that's great. I think that makes so much sense. And we're talking about human interaction. So of course, we should be staying away from screens. That's just also big part of our education these days is on screen. So I love that you took that approach, and I think that's so valuable. And I also wanted to mention that a lot of times, and I'm glad that you mentioned about the communication and how parents can adjust the messaging for their child, because a lot of times autistic individuals might need less language, or they may need more of a declarative comment instead of a question. And so the fact that that's a key part of it too, that the parents can read those questions or those prompts, and then they can make an adjustment and individualize it for their child. And I think that's important to mention, because that can also be a key part of applying the curriculum, of just having the awareness that, these are all these tools. And then as parents, and something we work a lot on with RDI too, is helping the parents to be able to learn about their child and make adjustments based on their child's abilities and needs and challenges and strengths, and so that they can set them up for success. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And I think it's such a great structure for families to have all even the answers, the potential answers, to give them an idea of what they're striving for, but then they can still make it their own.
Right.
And
they really know their kids their best, and I'm not presuming to say this is exactly what's best for everyone, but I know that these skills are important. And so really figuring out how to teach this to your children so it has meaning for them, that's the most powerful thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's so empowering for parents. And so I know we touched a bit on the competencies in your curriculum, and I'd love for you just to share, just a little bit more in depth on, maybe pick up one or two or however you'd like to share, but about these competencies: self-awareness, emotion regulation, empathy, problem solving, self-care, friendships, and social skills. I think these are all so critical, and I'd like to kind of dive deeper into these and just touch on them a bit more.
So the 9 units, as you mentioned, they cover those. The self-care I want to add to that, we also talk about stress management and talking about managing worries and anxiety, because we really feel like those are all, they go hand in hand. And then the other ones are, there's a listening, there's a communication unit, and then growth mindset and motivation. These themes came up over and over again in all of the research. Just over the years, I've done a million different SEL programs at school or research things for small groups and working with individuals. And it just keeps coming up over and over. Here is really the main skills that if kids learned, this could really overall benefit them in just so many different ways. So that's kind of basically where all the topics and everything have come from, is working with thousands of children.
Yes, I love it. You took this challenge and the problems you were seeing in the kids that were experiencing these things, and you created these tools. And I think it leads to happiness in life and success in life. And I think it's just so important. And I'm so grateful that you've created this curriculum. And I know that you talked about kind of like the breathing exercises and the kids being able to do that independently. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit on how you nurtured the transition from that guided participation to more self-use, and how the kids take over, these skills and learn to apply them on their own.
Yes, absolutely. So I believe very strongly in direct instruction. You have to teach the skill directly, because if, so many times we tell kids what not to do. don't yell, don't run, don't, hit your sister, don't do this, don't do that. And you know how much time kids sit thinking like, well, if I'm not supposed to do that, what am I supposed to do? So why don't we just tell them? Let's just say, hey, here are some things that are going to help with these relationships, or instead of don't yell, use a quiet voice. Or, we always phrase everything in the don'ts. So let's directly teach them, here's the kind of skill you're looking for. Then we're going to give them time to practice it. And again, when they're not upset, self-regulation is even like that too. There's actually two parts to self-regulation. And I feel like a lot of the times we kind of miss the second part. The first one is in the moment. In the moment, those feelings are happening and you're just trying to calm yourself down and maybe help your child calm down, and they're trying to calm down. But what the really crucial part of building self-regulation is building in times when you're doing it at home, when you're not upset. So in the morning, everyone's taking a deep breath before breakfast, or, sometimes kids can come up with their own breathing exercise or their own calming activity, and they're sharing it with everyone. Or you're in the car and now you're all taking turns, talking about something that helps you feel good or some positive self-talk or whatever it is. But you're building in these skills like into your day. And then when those big moments happen, or when, those skills, as a parent, we model it. So instead of just saying, calm down, which doesn't work ever, we sit there and we sit down and we take deep breaths and we count to 3, or we say, hey, I need a break right now. I feel very overwhelmed and I'm going to step away and I'll be back in 5 minutes when I'm calm. And so it's like directly teach them, practice, 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 modeling it. And then we need to step back, and then we need to let them just try it out, possibly struggle, most likely will struggle, keep working at it, and not jump in too soon to say, oh, here's what you should be doing. Because when we do that, we send the message that they can't do it themselves. And we don't want to send that message. We want to be there supporting you. Like, I know this is hard for you right now. I'm here supporting you, but you can do this. And so we still want to sit there and model and not leave them, like, do it yourself. We want to be that partner with them, but we want to make sure that we're sending the message that you can do this and I'm here to help support you. So those are really the biggest ways. And for parent modeling, so many times it's just sitting there. And again, if they like touch, putting your arm around them, just sitting with those uncomfortable feelings. And that's one of the most beneficial things we could teach our kids, is how do we sit with uncomfortable feelings and not try to solve it, not try to jump to what can we do about it, but just sit with it. Because once we do, they will pass. We can just breathe through it. We can talk ourselves down. But those are really the crucial ways that we can teach these skills.
I love it. It's so powerful. And I'm so glad you mentioned the modeling, and even in the moment modeling and out of the moment modeling, I think it's so critical. And we know that, when we observe something and through the mirror neurons, our brains start to integrate that information. So, and it also takes the pressure off of the child, just by observing it. And I think it's just so powerful, and it really does work. It's amazing to see when you start to take those deep breaths, the person next to you. I mean, I've seen it with other adults that are having a moment. I've seen it with children. This just works with everybody that's having a hard time. It just really works. And, so I think that is so powerful. And I love that that's a part of that transition process to, give children opportunities to really think for themselves in the moment of how to handle those big emotions. And that's, not always easy to do. So I think it's so important.
And there's so many times where, we just tell kids all the time what to do, what to do, what to do. And I think that, again, the direct teaching is important, but also starting first with where is the kid at? Where's their ideas? What are they capable of? I mean, because we are partners in their learning, and kids are more engaged and involved and empowered when they feel like they have choices in their learning, and it's not just something that's being done to them. I worked for many years at a design thinking school, and really I saw this firsthand where, so many of the teachers, they're like, I'm not even a teacher, I'm the facilitator. They already know where I'm just guiding them. And it just shifted my idea too of empowering kids and giving them, more responsibility to own their learning and to be, interested in it, and how can they bring, yes, you have to learn math and reading and all those things are important, but how can we incorporate some of your interests so that it feels meaningful for you, just like we would want to have meaning as an adult. They have all those same interests as well, and to keep them engaged and to keep them motivated. And so yeah, I just think it's all so important to partner with them.
Absolutely. And we know that the brain is an experience dependent organ. So they have to have that experience to develop their skills. Their brain has to be able to think through those moments and problem solve, and rather than just being told constantly what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And, I think that's so critical. And, I love that that's a part of this curriculum. So I'd love to talk about community and support networks. And are there support networks and webinars or groups for those implementing the curriculum?
So I am excited to be launching a private Facebook group for people who have purchased the curriculum, because I feel like it's really important for some of them to have a place to come and talk about how can they use these materials, how can they support each other, if there's hiccups along the way, what's best practices, all those types of things. And so anybody who's purchased the curriculum will have the opportunity to join the group, and then we'll meet regularly and we'll talk about what's going on and let everybody share their stories. There are different things out there, and I think that, it really depends on what kind of knowledge, what kind of things are you gravitating towards. Sometimes they have that through the schools, they have support. They know they have a county office of education. Like, it really depends, but this one will be very specific for how we're going to be implementing and using this curriculum and kind of best practices.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's such a great resource that you're going to be offering. And I imagine that families are going to really gain a lot from being able just to connect and share and reflect with each other and gain your insight and feedback. As you mentioned, sometimes this questions can come up, and parents need that support to, really make those adjustments. So I think that's so great. And do you foresee this going beyond homeschoolers? And I can imagine this would be beneficial for counselors or other neurodiverse professionals. How do you foresee the future for parenting EQ?
Yes, absolutely. So we already are partnering with Rotary clubs around San Diego, and they provide our materials to school counselors, school psychologists, speech pathologists in local schools. And so basically, we have taken all of our games that are in our life skills curriculum, and we have put them together in counselor educator bundles, and we have small group curriculums that go along with it, that building EQ in general, because it talks about self-regulation, self-awareness, empathy, and then also specifically there's one about like friendship and social skills. And so those can be used one-on-one, they're used in small groups, they're even used for class lessons as well. And special ed staff that have received these bundles, they use it to meet their IEP goals. And a lot of the counselors, they do have like an SEL program through their schools, but so many times teachers come and they'll say, hey, I'm having a problem with X behavior, or I'm seeing this in my kids, can you come and do a class lesson? And so I have a lot of counselors reach out and had said, hey, do you have some things that kind of go in order that maybe if I regularly go into classrooms, I can be using? And so this is exactly what they're looking for, because they could do it in small groups, they could do it as a classroom. So we've already kind of built those relationships in our local schools, and we just want to expand it even further. And then also, I just been accepted as a Live Well partner with the San Diego County. And so have a lot of connections. Yes, because the county does so many great things and supporting so many students. And so I've just been accepted this summer. And so
Fantastic.
now I'm working in how can I make connections, yes, with many more organizations and other schools as well.
Oh, congratulations. That's super exciting. And so when the school counselors are accessing your materials, are they buying the curriculum, or are you customizing it for their needs? How is that working?
Right. Well, the Rotary has been buying the bundles for them. So that's the games that come with the small group curriculums. We were just at ASCA this summer, the School Counseling Association. And so I spoke with a lot of counselors too about the expanding and doing the life skills curriculum as well, because if they wanted to look for more things to help supplement those classroom lessons. So it can be both.
Okay, great. I love that. Well, I'm excited to see what the future holds and how this continues to grow and evolve and to provide more resources to a variety of different professionals. I can imagine this is just the beginning. And I'd love to have you share, have you considered this for teens and maybe young adults as well?
Yes. And even so, our junior line, because there's so many things that we cover, can really be used for older students as well. Like our bundles do go through middle school, and there's actually high schools that use our bundles too, because developmentally, depending where kids are at, these are great tools for them. People ask me all the time about specifically for teenagers, and I do have a strong interest in it. Teens are all in different places. And so we really, I feel very strongly about meeting them where they are and kind of building out from there. So I do think that that's going to involve kind of like more parent involvement. And so I am thinking, the teen focused materials, definitely more information about screen time and even things like group chats and how we communicate differently. We have actually a section in communication about how we communicate differently digitally, versus in person, but really delving deeper into that, because we're having like two different relationships with people now. We have our online relationships and we have an in-person. And sometimes for kids, it could be vastly different. But I feel like it's also going to lead to more kind of parent coaching. I teach parent classes right now through a local school district and doing more of that, because I think that more people need kind of that individual. Here's where I'm at. Here's where my child is at. And then what kind of skills and what do we need to go forward?
I love it. Oh, it's so true. And that has been so challenging to navigate as parents, the whole technology and having relationships online. And it's so true. And it's different than what we grew up with. And so having to adjust is tricky to that. So I'd love for you to share, if you kind of leave us with an aha story or something that really stands out for you, maybe a success story, something that kind of just really is significant where a child was able to grasp one of your tools and maybe self-regulate unexpectedly, or just have a successful moment related to the areas that your curriculum was targeting. Is there any story you can think of that stands out?
Well, I think, we get a lot of feedback from the counselors who have our bundles, and there's just kind of a consistent theme of they were really struggling. And then they started doing this, like out of the blue, they'll just start doing this breathing technique, that they learned. And they went from they couldn't even regulate it all of a sudden they said, I need a break. And they stepped back. And so it's an overwhelming theme. It's not just one story, but,
Yeah.
and then the ones I get a lot, especially from the homeschool parents, are they say, well, Mom, I think your lid is flipped and maybe you need a break. And they mean it. They mean it from the best of their heart, right? The best of intentions. They're really just noticing, hey, you seem upset.
Yes.
Do you want to go in a calm space or do you want to take a break? So when they do that, and I've also seen kids, especially like kids who are really struggling with some of these skills, turn around and teach it to a younger student. And to me, that is super powerful too, when that they have a hard time controlling their emotions and they're sitting there saying, it seems like you feel really angry right now. And why don't you sit down with me and count to 10 or whatever it is? And when you see them teaching that, that is really powerful. Now, I do have to share, because I do all this with my own kids. My kids have inspired so much of this. And so a big aha moment for me is, there's been lots of moments where I'm like, wow, this is working. It's like so exciting. But there's times where, and now they're older, there's times where I hear them arguing. And in my head, as a parent, you're like, oh, I just want them to stop arguing. Can they just be done with it already? But then I actually listen to what they're saying. And they're not like being mean. They're not hitting below the belt. They are fighting fair, so to speak. They are saying, hey, I feel this way when you do this. And they're setting these boundaries. And I need you to stop. And did you think about how that made me feel? And, da, 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 da. And I actually am listening and I hear them working this out. Or sometimes they get to a point where be like, you know what, I'm just not ready to, not ready to let it go. I'm still mad about it. I need some space. And when I hear these things and I think, conflict is a part of life. It's really something that we need to work through, not shy away from, but address and speak clearly about what we need. And so teaching them to fight like in a healthy and productive way has always been a very big thing, because, I have two very different children. One is very strong-willed and spirited, and one would just go along with anything. And so I had to really teach that one that would go along with everything. Like, this is better for you and for your sibling to say, hey, I don't like that, or that's, I don't want that. Can we play my game, or can I go first? And really letting them set kind of those boundaries for themselves, and for the other person to hear, oh, okay, it's your turn to go first, and I need to wait, and I need to give you space, or I need to respect yours. And so when I hear these back and forth, I think like, this is really, I'm doing them such a service, and they're really grasping it, and they walk away and they're laughing and they're developing this great relationship. And I just feel like, this is it. This is the goal. This is what we're trying to do, is just really make this relationship strong, and then they can go out in the world and use the same skills, because it all starts at home, right? We practice with our siblings, and what we learn there really plays out in the world. And so it feels like there's something to this. It's working.
Yes. Yes. And sometimes you just have to keep at it, and you get to see those golden moments in the end. And one little thing at a time leads to another little thing, and a big, beautiful thing at the end. And, not to give up, and just to keep going forward with giving these opportunities for growth. And so I think that's so fantastic. I love that story. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners how people can find you, parents or professionals. What would be the best way to access your curriculum?
Okay, so our website is parentingeq.com. And there is a whole page about homeschool. So it talks about our life skills curriculum and shows you previews, table of contents, so you can see everything in it. And then our single item shop has our bundles and all the other products that we have as well. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at parentingeq.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure that is all in the show notes so everybody can access it. And thank you so much, Amy, for being on today. This was a fantastic conversation. I learned some things too. I always learn when I hear you speak and share. And I'm so grateful that you had the opportunity to share your information today and get this out there.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I break the molds with rebels mind. I'm a hurricane of free, born mine.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests, and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.